Welcome, everyone. This is the October 24th, 2023 meeting of the Carrboro Town Council. Glad to see you all here today. I need to pop up to the podium for a little something. Surprise for our town clerk.
Oh.
This is a resolution of appreciation for Town Clerk Wesley Barker. Whereas Wesley Barker arrived from beautiful Ashe County to begin his service as town clerk just as the town was emerging from the COVID-19 public health emergency, and whereas Wesley has made it his priority to provide excellent customer service to Carrboro's residents and visitors, and to systematize many processes in the town clerk's office with the goal of bringing greater consistency and efficiency to town operations. And whereas Wesley has been accessible and responsive to everyone coming through the town clerk's office, researching council decisions from the archives, meeting with advisory board applicants, replying to residents' emails, notarizing documents, and attesting contracts. And whereas Wesley made the fulfillment of public records requests a priority and developed a detailed tracking database of requests received by the town, and established a protocol for routing those requests through the town clerk's office. And whereas Wesley created a process for managing and updating the rosters of the town's 20 advisory boards and commissions, and worked closely with staff liaisons and volunteer applicants to navigate the appointments process. And whereas Wesley has been, you're not getting embarrassed yet, are you? Okay, good. And whereas there's more.
Okay, all right.
Whereas Wesley has been an integral part of the town's management team, leading the collating and publishing of the council's weekly agenda materials and creating a set of detailed how-to guides for staff to follow in developing agenda items. And whereas Wesley was instrumental in helping the town achieve a perfect score on the Human Rights Campaign's Municipal Equality Index for the first time in 2022. And whereas Wesley has taken on the countless other responsibilities of the town clerk, from supervising the deputy town clerk to helping organize council and town events, and is always timely about getting information to the council and following up to ensure we have what we need. And whereas it's hard to imagine anyone making a better first impression, and Wesley has been friendly, thorough, detail-oriented, organized, and a true ambassador for Carrboro. Now therefore be it resolved that the Carrboro Town Council hereby recognizes the exceptional commitment and contribution Wesley Barker has made to the town of Carrboro as town clerk, wishes him and his family happiness upon their return to the mountains, and knows he will find success and fulfillment as he pursues the next stage of his career. This, the 24th day of October, 2023.
Thank you.
Council members, if I could ask for a motion to approve this resolution.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Susan, seconded by Barbara. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The resolution is adopted unanimously. This is for you.
Thank you.
Got you a few gifts.
Okay. This is a surprise. I didn't.
I only know what one of them is, but
Okay.
I hope you enjoy the other one too.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah, and if you want to say anything, that's
I'll
fine.
say something real quick.
Great.
So, yeah. Since everybody gets to see me sit in the corner of the video every week anyway. So, thank you, Mayor, Council. You took a chance on me a couple years ago. I picked up and moved the place I always knew, moved down here. I've learned a tremendous amount. A lot. I've learned a lot in the last almost 2 years. So I appreciate your faith in me, and I feel like I've done a good job as town clerk. So I've enjoyed meeting everyone in the community. Some people have called me, they've heard, and so I appreciate that. So I do want to say though, the staff here is amazing. Just to the council and the community. I've never worked with a staff as dedicated and hardworking, and probably never will. So just take time to appreciate the staff that Carrboro has, because they're awesome. So and I wish those of you that are staying on the board or running the best of luck, and keep in touch. So thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any, council members, any adjustments or additions to the agenda? Sammy?
Yes, please. I'd like to include the resolution that I forwarded everyone.
This is the resolution you circulated about the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Correct.
I know that's been around, and I guess I just want to ask if there are any concerns or objections to adding that to the agenda tonight.
I prefer we didn't.
I agree.
Okay, so normally we would kind of operate by consensus in this situation. But since we don't have that, we'll have to operate by motion, Sammy. So if you would like to add this to the agenda under...
Move to include this on the agenda, please.
Okay. So there's a motion by Sammy to add this resolution to our agenda under resolutions. Is there a second? Danny?
I'm going to beg y'all's pardon here and speak for just a couple of minutes about this because I think it's worth taking seriously, both for the text of the resolution and for how we use our town council. And I really hate to do it, but y'all know me well enough to know that this shouldn't be too rude a shock. So, I mean, we talk a lot about the limitations of our role here and what we can actually materially change as elected representatives in Carrboro. And I think there's a very real sense in which, like, those limitations are the deal that we make with our constituents. You know, we operate in a system that has more issues than we could possibly treat behind this dais. And I think that is one of, you know, we talk a lot about how frustrating it is, but it's also one of the best things about this work. I think that all of us relish the opportunity to reach people in a way that, you know, national and global issues, as important as they are, often don't allow us to. I wrote all these remarks and I'm going to leave them because I'm sounding stupid. I want to be really real here. You know, we have a tradition here of resolutions like this, of using resolutions that go beyond our scope in town council. And I have been really reticent about many of those resolutions in the past. You know, when we called for a ceasefire in Ukraine, that was easy enough to call on a government not our own to stop violence, and it was easy to be unanimous. We've had other instances where they've caused real contention and problems in our ability to function together. And so I really want us to stop doing this. That said, this resolution, for me, cannot be the one where I start to stand on procedure. You know, the attacks by Hamas on Israel were despicable and horrible. Attacks on Israel by Hamas, I'm sorry, I'm nervous. They were awful, and having to condemn them from this role is not something I expect. I'm here with wet hair from feeding my children. You know, this is not necessarily somewhere that we expect to comment. But, you know, at the same time, since we have this tradition, I want to, you know, just call to mind that Hamas does not represent all of Palestine, and that, you know, it's important to raise our voice against collective punishment wherever it is that we can. And so I really want to make, I don't want to be here making this plea to us at an easy time. This is a hard issue. It's a hard vote. I've talked to all of you. And in transparency to people listening, traditionally when we have this, we want to be unanimous as a council, or at least operate on some kind of consensus. And I understand that unanimity is not always the best way to govern. But when it's something that's outside of our jurisdiction, we want to make sure that we are accurately speaking for all of our constituents. And it's clear in this case that there is not a way to do that, to speak for all of our constituents. I want to speak for myself and, you know, and where I stand on this issue. But I really want to make an urgent plea, you know, while we take this tough issue under consideration, that we treat this office, you know, with more reverence, respect for the opportunities that it has to affect change where we can affect it. Solidarity we can build for, you know, marginalized and dispossessed people that are here within our jurisdiction, and to be mindful of the ways that this compromises that work. I am so sorry to have talked that long. But this has really been weighing heavily on me, and I did want to provide context for I'm going to second this motion to consider this on the agenda tonight.
Thanks, Danny. I hear you loud and clear. Okay, so there's a motion to add this resolution to the agenda. It's been seconded. Any further comment before we vote on that? Oh, okay, Randy. And I just asked council members to keep to the comments to the motion, which is whether to add this to the agenda, not the content of the resolution, because we're not there.
Yeah, I would not agree to add this motion, this resolution to the agenda. We cannot hope to represent all of our community through this resolution, and I am not here to represent my personal views, but I am here to represent community, and this is a very delicate, complicated issue, and I'm going to leave it at that.
Before we vote on the motion to add this to the agenda, can I, Sammy?
Firstly, I just want to say, like, I find it, well, good, timely that I'm leaving this council in time, because I find it shocking that this tradition of Carrboro speaking out for issues that are local, the Iraq War, the way money gets misallocated towards war and not allocated towards affordable housing in town. How many needs do we have? Half of our discretionary spending in this country is spent on killing people. War, that's what war is. And if you guys are hiding behind procedure and some notion that speaking out and taking a stand doesn't have an effect on our representatives to the federal government in terms of how they represent us and how we represent and translate that for them to represent us, I find it very sad. Like, this is not the Carrboro I know, and it's kind of timely that I'm leaving because it's not the Carrboro I want to be, the council I want to be representing, because I certainly know it's the Carrboro I have been representing. I've talked to a lot of people about this resolution. This resolution talks about ceasefire in Gaza. It also speaks to I'm going to read it because people don't know what we're
And
talking
I'm going
about.
to ask you to, let's stick to the motion which is before us, which is whether to add this to the agenda or not.
Okay. Sure.
I
So
agree.
those were my comments on that. Sorry, I thought we were already voting on the resolution itself. But I just find it incredible and incredibly sad that unanimity. I mean, imagine the Senate needing unanimity to get anything done. 60 votes is already very undemocratic, and it's just incredible that that's where this council's gotten to. Thanks.
Thank you, Sammy. Okay, there's a motion and a second. Motion by Sammy, second by Danny to add the resolution to our agenda so we can take it up under resolutions. All in favor of the motion to add to the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Mr. Clerk, there's 3 votes in the affirmative, Sammy, Danny, and myself, and 4 votes in the negative, Randy, Susan, Eleazar, and Barbara. The motion fails. Sammy, I appreciate your time putting it together, really.
Yeah.
I appreciate Danny's comments about just reflecting on this role we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
But we'll move on to the rest of our agenda.
And it's shocking.
Okay. Our poet laureate is here, as usual, to kick us off. Welcome, Liza Will Francis.
Good evening, council and everyone here. Yes, so I want to say a couple things. One, I wanted to say bye to Wesley. Thank you for your work. I just learned that he was leaving, and that's sad. You will be missed. Thank you for all you've done. And I wanted to just give a real quick recap of, we had the Poetry Festival this past weekend, and lots of people came out. We had an event at Luna on Thursday night. We had an event at the New Arts Center on Friday night. And on Saturday, we had poetry all day, ending in a slam over at Steel String Brewing. All were well attended and lots of fun. And we wrote a community poem So we've been doing a community poem where people add a line to the poem online. So we had a few people do that, but not many. So in the remaining time on the day, on Saturday, people decided that they would write some together. And so this is kind of a combination of what they wrote in that moment on Saturday and also some of the ones that were submitted from online. Okay, and I have just put them together. And they named it on Saturday Community, which was the theme of this year's festival, Carrboro style. And this is a little bit, you can kind of see a snapshot in time for right now. Greetings, friends, on a stroll down Weaver Street, weaving our way through parks and gardens, gorgeous and neat, playing tennis with friends and family, all the while an underlying anguish over the Palestine-Israel conflict. But I hope I am mistaken at how at our higher selves and our higher selves rebel toward unity. I slow at the crosswalk, mouth open to pinking sky. Nothing is in my mind right now. I gaze at the moon, and it is younger than I am. In October, Carrboro slows down for poetry as the festival days unfold like a poem. Bipolar weather, no better hug than sweaters. Days get longer, light dims the day, sun shaded from full moon's glory, jealous withdrawing rays hiding away, waiting to find the authentic and heartfelt. We gather at the elm, we listen to the tree and to one another, and the squirrels skittering as they take their exercise beside the red and silver hydrants, statuesque, almost classical. We offer tribute to our tributaries, Morgan, New Hope, and Booker Creeks, the water we depend on that flows through all of us. Festival of Verse sparked another upstream. Speak peace, join our forces for peace for all the people in the Middle East. Hear these words as our words, as all we need to say to each other, as how we need to remember to be together listening to our poetry. Let's all gather by the elm, let's speak, let's listen to the tree and to one another. We join words together in boxes from which we stand and speak. I'm no transient when out in Carrboro. Isn't that it, a community? I have some currency of fame here. If you listen closely, you may hear the chairs outside Weaver Street Market speak their many colors. Listen as they join together for coffee chit-chat and small bites of banter. This palette of voices, these shades of poetry. Words fly into town, plant poems in fertile minds. Speak up, Carrboro. That was our community poem written by a bunch of people in our community. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you, Council.
Thank you, Liza, and thank you to you and to the Poets Council for organizing this year's festival. As usual, it was fantastic. I kind of sometimes wish it were recorded because there was a really powerful session with all of the poets laureate from our region and from our state, from across the state, and it was worth more people hearing. So thanks for organizing that. Okay, we have a couple of resolutions on the agenda here. First is a resolution that is traditionally introduced by Barbara on the Operation Greenlight program for veterans. Do you want to read that resolution, Barbara?
Good evening. Good evening. I would like to read a resolution supporting Operation Greenlight for veterans. Whereas the people of Carrboro respect, admire, and appreciate the individuals who selfishly have served the United States of America in the armed forces by placing themselves in challenging or perilous situations. And whereas the contributions and sacrifices of those individuals who served in the armed forces have been vital in maintaining the freedoms and ways of life that we enjoy in our local communities. And whereas Operation Greenlight is a nationwide initiative to support veterans and raise awareness about the challenges many veterans face in accessing benefits and services. Whereas approximately 70% of veterans experiencing homelessness also experience substance use disorders, and 50% live with mental illnesses such as post-traumatic stress disorder. And whereas approximately 200,000 service members transition to civilian communities annually, and an estimated 20% increase of service members will transition to civilian life in the near future. And whereas studies indicate that 44 to 72% of service members experience high levels of stress during transition from military to civilian life, and active service members transitioning from military service are at a high risk for suicide during their first year after military service. And whereas veterans continue to serve our communities in the American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars, religious groups, community organizations, and civil service, and as county veteran service officers in 29 states to help fellow former service members access more than $52 billion in federal health, disability, and compensation benefits each year. And whereas the town of Carrboro seeks to join other communities through Operation Greenlight for Veterans to shine a light on the plight of veterans across the country who are having a hard time connecting with benefits after serving their country. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the Carrboro Town Council declares the period from November 6th through Veterans Day, November 11th, and ending November 12th, 2023, to be a time to honor the service and sacrifice of individuals in uniform transitioning from active service. Be it further resolved that in observance of Operation Greenlight, the town of Carrboro shall display green lights on Carrboro Town Hall, and the town council encourages residents to participate by displaying a green light in a window of their place of business or residence from November 6th through November 12th. This, the 24th day of October 2023. And Mayor, I will move the resolution while I'm up here.
I was going to ask.
I know.
Thank you for that. Is there a second? And moved by Barbara, seconded by Eleazar to adopt the resolution. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The matter passes unanimously. Thank you, Barbara. I think this is the third or fourth year in a row we've done that one. The next item on the agenda is a resolution that I believe Eleazar has, and we have a number of guests in the audience with us today, including a very special guest. Maybe I'll ask our special guest, he knows who he is, to come up to the podium.
Actually about to do that myself.
And I just want to also, Barbara, I think we talked a little bit about the issue of recusing yourself. So council members, can I have a motion to excuse Barbara from this item on the agenda?
So moved.
Due to a conflict of interest. It's been moved by Eleazar and seconded by Randy. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Barbara's excused temporarily. Eleazar, thank you. Go ahead.
Yes. Good evening, colleagues. I want to invite a friend, Donita, up here to help me with this resolution. Initially, I was going to read this tonight, but Donita was graceful enough to contact me a number of weeks ago around this project. So when I saw her coming in at the same time, I felt what's no better honor to have her read the resolution before us. So I'll have her read, then I'll move.
Welcome, Danita.
Hey, thank you.
Good to see you.
I want to, of course, begin with gratitude, specifically to Eleazar, who was so gracious when we brought this forward, and also to the town, of course, to the community, and to the Fashie family, my friend Barbara. So, Mr. Fashie, this is a resolution honoring Braxton Fashie. Whereas the Honorable Braxton Duncan Fashie was born on December 13th, 1939, and whereas Braxton Duncan Fashie, around the age of 15 years old, became a part of a voter registration project and worked with Miss Rebecca Clark to escort and protect older Black citizens to register to vote in Carrboro. Prior to their involvement, citizens of Carrboro had to guess how many jelly beans were in a jar in order to register. following a national pattern of voter disenfranchisement. And whereas in 1961, Braxton Duncan Fashee began to work with the local labor movement in Carrboro and Chapel Hill, advocating for equal pay and fair treatment for Black residents. And whereas in 1969, Braxton Duncan Fashee became the first Black member of the Carrboro Town Council, then known as the Board of Aldermen, and served until 1981. And whereas Braxton Duncan Fashee championed many issues which impacted the Black community in Carrboro, including ensuring equitable access to paved roads, sidewalks, and bicycle infrastructure for the Black residents of Carrboro, and whereas Braxton Duncan Fashee worked tirelessly to fight injustices against Black residents by law enforcement in the 1970s, resulting in state agencies investigating and diversifying the Carrboro Police Department in the 1970s. And whereas Braxton Duncan Fashee has dedicated over 54 years of his life to continuous service as an elected official, a member of the Town Advisory Board, and a community leader, now, therefore, it be resolved that the Town of Carrboro hereby honors and thanks Braxton Duncan Fashee for his tremendous service to the Town of Carrboro. Be it further resolved that the Carrboro Town Council designates December 13th, 2023, and every December 13th thereafter as Braxton Duncan Fashee Day of Service in Carrboro, on which day the town encourages the residents of Carrboro to learn and reflect on Carrboro's Black history and perform an act of service to their neighbors or the community. This, the 24th day of October, 2023.
Colleagues, I move this motion.
Right. Eleazar has moved approval of the resolution. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Danny. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Braxton, congratulations.
I can clap.
Well, let me thank the town council for this honor. And I would like my wife, as you know, I have my daughter, my oldest daughter, my grandson, and his fiance are here representing our family. And my grandson in the back, Josh. Josh is a man of the cloth, and I'm very proud of my whole family. When it was strange that the poem was about community, because I always say you have to know the community to be in the community. So that means that you don't come around every 2 to 4 years knocking on the door asking for us to vote. If you're already in the community, you don't have to do that because people know you. I think that my service speaks for itself. And I will leave it like that. Thank you. Sorry. My brother and his wife are in the back. I didn't see him come in. T and Dorita, why don't y'all stand, please?
Appreciate all of Braxton's family coming out today, too, and friends. I see a lot of friends in the audience for this day. Thank you. I'll have to talk to the family, Bob. Didn't know you were in the reserved section. All right, thank you all. Mr. Clerk, did we vote on that resolution? I think we did. Okay, it was unanimous. Okay. Okay, Mr. Clerk, we're ready for an announcement of upcoming meetings, please.
Good evening again, Mayor and Council. Got a couple meeting announcements here. First up, we have a Racial Equity Commission meeting on October 25th at 6 p.m. And that will be at the Bim Street facility. And then next week, we do not have a town council meeting because it is the 5th Tuesday. So there is no town council meeting next week. But on November 2nd, we have a Carrboro Appearance Commission meeting at 6:30 p.m. Also on November 2nd, the Northern Transition Area Advisory Committee at 6:30 p.m. Environmental Advisory Board at 7:30 p.m. And that'll be it for the next couple weeks. I won't go no further. But the next, keep in mind that there will be no town council meeting on November 7th as it is election day. And the next council meeting will be November 14th at 7 p.m.
Thanks, Wesley. And just so council members know, tomorrow morning I'll be having a meeting with the mayors and the managers and the chair about the Green Tract as part of our usual just update from staff about what's going on with that. And there's a chapel, I don't know if the chapel transit meeting coming up this Thursday morning virtually at 10 o'clock. And yes, Randy.
Yeah. The Central Carolina Pines Regional Council will hold a meeting tomorrow night, and that is the former Triangle J Council of Governments.
Thanks, Randy. Do you had an announcement about the executive order?
Yeah. So today, Governor Cooper issued an executive order 292, and the new executive order builds upon the executive order 246 that reestablishes the Secretary of Environmental Quality, Equity and Justice Advisory Board to the Equity and Justice, the Governor's Council. And the transition has been made to build upon the success of the DEQ and create a forum for environmental justice concerns and opportunities throughout our state government and the governor's cabinet. So it's a moment where what had been traditionally siloed in terms of environmental justice, now there will be a unified effort, and the council will be doing that work. So I'm delighted that they've made that commitment.
Great. Thanks for the update, Randy, and thanks for serving on that council. Any other meetings to announce or other announcements? Okay, now we'll come to we have the public comment period. I have a couple of folks signed up to speak. I don't know if they still want to speak, but Bob, you're on the list. I don't know what the topic. Oh, about the Westwood? Are you speaking in favor of it?
It's just a minute.
All right. Why don't you come up and do that now, since we have that on the consent agenda? Thanks.
If that Barbara walked out, I was going to say that I
She'll be back.
feel fortunate to have stumbled upon that resolution. I did read the Indy article about Braxton's contributions back in the 60s, and before the meeting started, that's what I was complimenting him on. And by sheer chance, I was there when Silent Sam got pulled down. I was from here to there to the ropes. So that was nice. But anyway, so the clarifying resolution looks good, especially the map. Thank you. The folks on our side will be grateful for a strong vote approving this resolution this evening, since that will prevent future misunderstandings, which could lead to tensions rising again. But I'm also here tonight on behalf of the countless unborn generations of people who will live on this densely populated neighborhood over the coming centuries. So on their behalf, I'd like to express my gratitude to any of you who will vote to approve this clarifying resolution. thereby helping to ensure their ready access to a quiet, open green space for relaxation and respite.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate that. I don't know if Kathy, you still wanted to speak or. Come on up, Kathy. Okay, welcome. It's good to see you again.
I did want to say it in person. I did want to say this in person. I wanted to talk to you about the efforts to get the resolution passed that Sammy had crafted. And I originally wrote this on Friday, and I know that the resolution had changed. But I want to say this again. As most of you know, I have immediate family in Israel, and I also know many people who are directly affected by the ongoing crisis. I'm not alone. Many people I know do. And in fact, a member of my synagogue has family that were both killed and abducted, different people, many cousins, in the same kibbutz, but they were both killed and abducted into Gaza by Hamas terrorists on October 7th, and they're still there. Since the attack, there has been a rise in anti-Semitic vitriol locally and specifically on the UNC campus. Talking to an Israeli who works with Jewish students there and another teacher that works with Jewish students there today, she said, or they said, that most of them are afraid to be publicly Jewish and afraid to speak up. I have also seen flyers throughout town calling specifically for the murder of my friends and my family in Israel. I also know that emotions, even locally, have to be raw for people with friends and family directly affected on both sides of the conflict. So in this context, and I've expressed this to a few members of the council, probably, I guess all of you now, I think any statement by the council on the political situation or what the solution should be can only increase the vitriol and is likely to contribute to folks here feeling unsafe. I certainly feel it. I'm going to skip through a bunch of stuff that I wrote. But I believe that the town of Carrboro's role should be to support all of its citizens. I deeply appreciate your deciding not to put forth a resolution on the agenda for this meeting and now to not go forward with it, because I think that any resolution you create is more likely to upset individual community members in some way and inflame tensions. No one needs the town of Carrboro to weigh in or fan the flames, and I really just wanted to thank you for not doing that. Thanks.
Thank you for coming out tonight, Kathy.
Damon, could I please just respond? Because I feel like I wasn't able to even read the title of this resolution.
And we're not going to. It wasn't added to the agenda.
Okay, so I just want to respond because Kathy shared this earlier, and this is what I wrote to Kathy. Thank you for sharing your feedback and your consideration of a ceasefire, and on what I thought was our consideration of a ceasefire resolution tonight. I am with you in grieving for the Israeli civilian lives that were killed by Hamas in Israel, not only because these are clear war crimes and cries against humanity, but because I am also feeling the impact it is having on my family and friends, including my family and friends who are from Israel. However, as awful as those atrocities are, they do not justify a response in kind, that is, killing civilians, and the massive destruction of civilian infrastructure and the continued siege, occupation, and displacement of a whole people. I grieve for the Palestinian people too. As I grieve, I also recognize that I and we have agency in stopping the violence. As Americans, we have agency to stop funding more civilian death, and as Americans, we are complicit when we are silent. Currently, for Carrboro citizens, there is no body of governance at any level taking meaningful action in stopping this. Carrboro has a long record of speaking up, contributing to the narratives, and creating pressure by standing for what is right. This includes speaking out when our country engages in war, its atrocities, and the misallocation of national resources for war. While there are times when this is hard to do, as it is now, these are the times when it matters most. The resolution that I thought we were considering tonight is precisely for stopping the polarization that Kathy tonight described, by addressing the part that we participate in as a country, which is a root cause of this cycle of violence. Despite the challenges people are experiencing, I am certain that nobody in Carrboro is for the U.S.'s part in the killing of civilians, the destruction of their infrastructure, and the ongoing siege, occupation, dispossession, and displacement of the Palestinian people. And I told Kathy, if, you know, I'd love to talk to you further about it. And my wife even offered, she's from Israel and has lots of family there and is also available to speak about this from her perspective, because she feels adamantly that stopping the ongoing siege and attack on Gaza is one of the most important ways we can support Israelis right now. And I share this with love and solidarity, Kathy. And, you know, through a mission, we're not speaking for a lot of people, just as through speaking for someone, we do speak for some people. So this is very painful and hurtful for a lot of people, and I'm representing them here tonight.
Right. Thank you, Sammy. We're going to move on. I appreciate the comments. Kathy, thanks for coming. Bob, thanks for your comments. I don't have anyone else signed up to speak during the public comment period, so we're going to move on to the consent agenda. Madam Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, council members. The first item is an approval of meeting minutes from Town Council retreat held on January 21st, 2023. Town Council meetings held on February 14th, 21st, and 28th, 2023. And Town Council meeting held on October 17th, 2023. Just to note that the approved minutes from the October 17th meeting from last week are a requirement for the Housing and Community Services CDBG-CV grant closeout submission. The second item is a contract authorization and project ordinance adoption for Jones Ferry Road median modifications associated with the Jones Ferry Road restriping project. The purpose of this agenda item is to seek Town Council authorization for the town manager to enter into a contract with Triangle Grading and Paving, enabling the modification of the 3 sections of the center median on Jones Ferry Road and the adoption of the project ordinance. The next item is an amendment to the capital project ordinance for bike loop detector project to incorporate additional service transportation block grant funds. The purpose of this agenda item is to seek Town Council approval for amending the project ordinance to allocate additional funding, enabling the project to progress to the construction bidding phase. The next item is a resolution for clarification of the Westwood Cemetery Master Plan green space. The purpose of this item is to provide clarifying language regarding the decision not to develop the designated green space within Westwood Cemetery. The final item is the special use permit A extension request for Lloyd Farm Phase 1 at 700 and 706 Old Fayetteville Road. The purpose of this agenda item is to seek Town Council's consideration of a request to extend the expiration date of the special use permit A for Lloyd Farm Phase 1, which is currently set to expire today on October 24, 2023. Town staff recommends approval of this request.
Very much, Marie. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Sorry, Marie, did you, I know you said it, but I missed it. Did you mention the amendments to the minutes and whose amendments are on there?
I think all of the amendments are
All
included.
the amendments, okay, good. I'd just like to pull the last one, please.
Which one is that? The Lloyd Farm?
Lloyd Farm.
Is there a
Move the
motion to,
rest.
so it's motion by Sammy, and somebody's phone is going off repeatedly. Motion to approve items 1 through 4 by Sammy, seconded by Eleazar. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Matter passes unanimously. Item number 5, Sammy.
I'm pulling number 5 for being consistent. When that was approved, I didn't vote for it, and I'm not going to vote for it tonight. So it's pulling.
Fair enough. Thank you for letting us know. Yeah, it's interesting to see that one coming back up, but I guess there are a lot of delays from the pandemic. And okay, moved by Eleazar. Is there a second? Second by Susan. All in favor, say aye.
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 Nay.
And thank you, Sammy. So that item number 5 on the consent agenda is adopted 6 votes to 1 with Sammy voting no. All right, so Madam Manager, you have everything you need with those CDBG CV minutes, right? We're official now.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Okay, then we'll carry on. Madam Manager.
For the public hearing, the first public hearing we have this evening is the legislative public hearing on land use ordinance text amendment regarding residential density and planned unit developments. The purpose of this agenda item is to consider a text amendment to the land use ordinance regarding residential density and planned use developments. The draft ordinance has been prepared and Town Council must receive public comment before making a decision. And we have Tina Moon, Planning Administrator, here to give a presentation and answer any questions.
Thanks, Marie. Welcome, Tina. While Tina comes up, since this is a legislatively or statutorily required public hearing, I will officially open the public hearing, and Tina's our first speaker.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Sorry to have to show the back end. I just can't bring myself to not make last-minute changes. Okay, so thank you. The first public hearing for tonight, as you mentioned, thank you for the introduction, is the consideration of text amendments related to our plan unit developments. A quick kind of primer of what plan unit developments are. We don't talk about those too often, but these are specific zoning districts which are intended to combine characteristics of different types of districts. So the base of the district is residential, but there's at least a commercial component and often a commercial and a manufacturing or an industrial component. There's some specific criteria which are identified in the ordinance. As you can see with the table, there's, I think, 60 or 66 different permutations that for which you can create a PUD. We have two in Carrboro now. The Ballantyne project, which is up off of Old 86. Here's 86, so the future Twin Creeks is up to the north, and the Zen Claremont South. So the focus is really of this area here, which some of you may remember was intended to be their commercial component. They're both set up so that the residential piece is R10, which is 10,000 square feet per dwelling unit, and B3 is the commercial component. So this is the way it would work as set up in the ordinance. If you had a scenario where, for example, you had a PUD that was approved with two components, so a commercial component, which is shown here in purple, a residential component, which is shown in the green. This would be the total amount of dwelling units which would be available based on the base zoning. So this would be the scenario here. In this particular example, even though the amount of area dedicated to residential zoning allowed for up to 100 dwelling units, their specific development program only called for 50. So if sometime down the road that applicant was interested in increasing the residential component of the commercial district, and I think most of you know, most of our commercial districts allow for some residential use. The way the ordinance is set up is that they would be able to request up to 25% of the unused or available residential density from the residential zone. And that would allow them to increase, in this particular example, from the existing 5 dwelling units to up to 30. And that would still retain some available kind of residual residential use for some future purpose, ADUs or some other applicant or town interest. A modification to the permit would be needed, and the type of permit would be dependent on the size of the project. Here's the actual language in the draft ordinance, and so you can see the specification of the different elements, and then this new language here, which explains what we just saw in the illustration. Since it's been a while since we've talked about text amendments, we thought we would go through the procedural notes. You know that these are legislative decisions, so we're having the public hearing. There is a consistency recommendation in your packet to talk about consistency with what is now our comprehensive plan, as well as a general statement in terms of public benefit. A reminder always of the conflict of interest provision. Here is what seems to me like a pretty good reference to the comprehensive plan. This speaks specifically to the 2 commercial elements of the 2 plan unit developments, the Bellany Place, which is the one in Claremont, and Ballantyne. So this seems to meet that standard. We submitted, as always, text amendments go to Orange County, and in this case, just to the planning board, and their comments are in your packet. The pocket questions have been prepared. The pocket questions focus on the process. The consistency speaks to the other, the other town interests. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Tina. And I'll just say that I found the staff memo to be really clear and helpful, so thanks for that as well, and the presentation too. I don't have anyone from the public signed up to speak on this item. Is there anyone out there who made a mad rush to town hall to speak on PUDs? All right, council members, questions for Tina or comments for your colleagues? Susan.
Thank you, Tina. That was very clear. And I have just one question for you. I live in Winmore, and which of course has this little commercial hub surrounded by residential area. And I'm gathering from your presentation, Winmore's not considered, I know it's a village mixed use. That's going to be entirely separate from this
Winmore's
then.
not a PUD.
And help me out. What is the distinction? I'm asking because, I was wondering, could this also apply? Could this just be extended to include Winmore? And I'm curious because I know that in Winmore there's a lot of vacancies in the commercial, with the commercial space, and so I wondered about having that opportunity one day that maybe they just want to convert that into residential use. So my question is, could
Sure.
Winmore be a part of this as well?
Sure. I think that the simple answer would be no, not the way this particular ordinance is set up, which focuses just on plan unit developments. As you mentioned, the Winmore project was approved as part of the village mixed use, which is a different type of district. So that's not to say that that district couldn't be amended, but it would go through a different process. And I'll turn to see if Marty wants to add to that.
Well, just consistent with what Tina said, it's a different, it's not apples to apples really, but to speak to Winmore specifically, since that is the one and only village mixed-use project we have, there's a lot of available density there, and by its nature as a village mixed-use type project, you could already, take advantage of this type of additional density if there was a desire to do so at some point in the future. That project did not nearly max out the available density.
Great, thank you. Thank you both.
I'll make a comment.
Susan, are you
I'm
finished?
all done.
Great. Randy?
Yeah, I just want to thank staff. I've appreciated the report and the way it was outlined, but I also appreciate the thinking about keeping things flexible for potential commercial. We don't know how things are going to look in the future in terms of what compacted area of density we'll need, and I think that was wise. So thank you.
Thanks, Randy. Not seeing other hands, I'm going to close the public hearing. For what it's worth, it's closed. Council members, we have two actions before us to consider tonight. One is to adopt a resolution of consistency. I haven't heard any objections to what staff has presented, so I would suggest that motion would be to adopt attachment A, indicating that the draft ordinance is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
I'll move that.
That's been moved by Randy. Is there a second? Second by Barbara. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So that motion is unanimous. And then the next action to take would be to adopt the draft ordinance in attachment B. Is there a motion to do that?
So moved.
Second?
Moved by Randy, seconded by Susan. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That also passes unanimously, and we have a fresh new PUD ordinance. Thank you, Tina.
Ordinance.
PUDnance.
So repugnant.
Oh, okay, let's carry on.
I was going somewhere else.
We do have another public hearing tonight, and I'll hand it back over to the manager.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. The next is a legislative public hearing on land use ordinance text amendments modifying residential parking. The purpose of this agenda item item is for the town council to consider text amendments to the land use ordinance that would modify residential parking requirements. A draft ordinance has been prepared, and the town council must receive public input before making a decision. And again, we have Tina to present on it.
Thank you. While Tina takes her time getting up to the podium, I will once again open this public hearing. We are now open.
Okay, thank you. Okay. This is the first of what I suspect will be many text amendments coming forth as part of implementation of the comprehensive plan. So,
From your lips to
yes, a
our ears.
major milestone with that. And thanks to those present and not present, I'm watching from home. For none of this happens individually. It's all a group effort. I don't want to spend time referencing back too much as to what you have already talked about at previous meetings, other than to remind everyone that you've had 2 presentations or 2 discussions on this topic so far. The first came in May, where there was a discussion of how to take what was in the comprehensive plan and begin to use that to structure some text amendments related to parking. The interest that was described in the comprehensive plan really focused on transit, how to use transit as a way to reduce or put a maximum on the amount of parking, focusing at this point on residential uses. And we looked at the existing at the existing areas of transit that met the criteria set forth in the ordinance. And as you may remember, in part because of reduced drivers with COVID that we're still recovering from, although we're much farther towards that, there really weren't that many places in the town that met the standard. So moving forward with a little bit of a pivot, we shifted more toward looking at zoning districts and targeting this interest in that way. Instead, looking at our existing standards, transit service still, but just trying to understand, how we could set up the text amendments to move forward in a slightly different way based on our existing ordinance. I want to focus on what's in the ordinance now, not every single standard, but the key standards for parking, which we will talk about tonight. The table of parking, which we all are familiar with, 15-291. It's really important, I think, to understand that the standards are set up to make sure that new uses will have sufficient parking on site for their needs. It's also important, I'm just going to draw your attention, if I can, there we are, the fact that the standards are considered presumptive standards, and that they're intended to be flexibly administered. And this is mentioned in a couple of locations in the parking article. The table for parking speaks to vehicles. We now have EV charging references as well as bicycles with design standards for those. And there's also other sections of the ordinance that seeks to opportunities for flexibility, either through joint use of shared parking, time-based, satellite parking, and so forth. And there's an existing provision that limits the total amount of parking. So we have quite a bit built into our ordinance already. The way that the draft ordinance is set up, there's 3 main standards with one alternate for 3 main sections with an alternate section for number 2. The first would remove the residential classifications, and I've listed these for folks who aren't as familiar with the numbers. So our main residential uses, single family, 2-family, multifamily, from those presumptive standards. So the existing minimum would be replaced with an existing maximum. And this is in both Part 1, which is the main portion of the table, as well as Part 2, which focuses on the downtown. There was a request at the request to set to remove an existing provision that kind of calls out parking for uses intended for folks of lower income or the elderly. So that's one that I just want to highlight because we'll want to talk about that at the end. And then section number 3 of the ordinance would remove residential uses from that no more than 110%. So those are the three changes that are proposed. Oops. We did a bit of outreach. Oh, sorry.
Go back just 30 seconds. Okay. Thanks.
Knowing that this was a change and that also this was the beginning of work with the comprehensive plan, we did quite a bit of outreach. And thanks to Trish and to Duncan Dotson, I think many of you know who did quite a bit of this. And we've listed here the events and the types of activities that we had, focusing on making sure people knew about the draft ordinance, what was in it, when to come at this public hearing for public comment if they had some. Again, we just talked about the procedure notes, but I want to go through those again real quick. The section about adopting or rejecting an ordinance, the conflict of interest, and the central interest of the public health, safety, and welfare. The two sections of Carrboro Connects that is essentially the genesis of this particular text amendment, as well as the relationship to affordable housing, which was identified as a possible cross interest as well. And now we'll get to the meat of it, I think, which is under considerations. And I think this is something that we're all trying to balance. I know the advisory boards were trying to balance it. Many of these were in your materials that you received at your first two discussions on this, is how do you proceed with this type of a text amendment? Reducing parking when we're still working on getting transit at a high level in all locations. Is there a way to retain some of the existing flexibility? Is there interest in maybe setting up some flexibility for staff? We typically do not set up scenarios where staff has discretionary decisions, has discretion. And so if we wanted to do that, we would have to set up criteria for that. Is there a way that we could make that existing language more clear so everyone realizes that they are in fact presumptive standards now and that there is already some flexibility? Could we rewrite or highlight that section to get that more apparent? And then the potential downsides. Well, if we move forward with this and we may not find out until a couple of years down the road that perhaps there's insufficient parking, where would that parking go? We talked a little bit about our street standards. We don't have a lot of places where we have on-street parking because there just isn't space for that. If we were to set up on-street parking, would that conflict with the bike lane? And we have some different interests that we're trying to balance. We certainly talked a lot about our interest in TDM, Transportation Demand Management, and we are working hard to bring up to speed bike ped infrastructure as well as behavioral changes. Those two things work together. And then is there a way that we can kind of evaluate this as we continue working down the road? These are some of the things that we talked about at the advisory board meeting. So in terms of recommendations, Orange County, we chatted about this a little bit and they found no inconsistency. Staff typically doesn't comment on advisory board comments, so I'm going to let those stand as they are in your packet for you to read. I do want to just draw your attention that we noticed a couple of things in common among them, and that was this interest of trying to retain some of the presumptive standards or some flexibility just for those situations that we hadn't predicted, and also areas more out of the downtown area where parking might be more important for folks who didn't have access to transit. There was interest in trying to look at this more holistically. We focused right now on residential parking because we are working on the downtown master plan, and we had hoped to analyze parking as part of that effort. There was some discussion about maybe these should come forth together. And there was also an interest, as the ordinance is considered, to pursue the alternative section that would remove that reference to lower income and elderly folks. The pocket questions, again, are provided, and again, I'll note the pocket questions focus more on the process than content. In hindsight, maybe they should have had a little bit more content. We'll learn from that. There is a resolution of consistency in your packet. And I just want to point out in italics the last bullet. Oh, and if you would, if you move forward, to please reference that preference for the alternate or not. If in your deliberations and your discussions you feel like some tweaks are needed, depending on the extent of those may be things that we would need to work on a little bit and bring back. So we've identified a potential date so that the public hearing could be continued rather than having us come back and set another date. And with that, I think I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Tina. I was very tempted to jump in with a question, but I'm going to model good behavior and hold on to it. Instead, I'm going to ask the one person we have signed up to speak this evening to come up and do that for his 3 minutes, and that is Patrick McDonough. And if there's anyone else out there who wanted to speak on this, will you please make a, there we go. Welcome, Patrick. You've been here before, so you know the 3-minute rule and all that.
Yes?
Right there. The very bottom, yep.
All right, thank you. I will do my best to hit the mark. You have a good start tonight. I'm going to encourage you to be more bold. Your goal, reduce negative effects of parking requirements on housing costs and natural resources. Unfortunately, neither of those things are discussed in your packet. We have more about parking behavior, and it's addressed kind of with speculation rather than evidence. So let's talk about some evidence. You have no new housing downtown for 10 years. Shelton Station was the last thing that was permitted. We heard a little bit about flexibility and presumptivity. Nobody's taking you up on it. Consider that that is a flaw in your current system. Climate action, also missing from the staff memo. I'm going to put this back up at the end. At the top, you have actions you could take tonight. In the middle row, how it affects your climate action impacts. And on the bottom, how much flexibility it gives to developers. They don't always match up. I'll share that at the end. I saw something and I've heard it. Existing apartment complexes, will they start charging for parking and hurt existing renters? I actually reached out to Raleigh staff yesterday because I know some folks over there. They did parking reform a couple years ago. They removed parking requirements. They did not see this happen anywhere in the city. Raleigh has higher parking prices than we do in Carrboro. They have residential pricing in some places already. So if they didn't see it in a more high-priced city, we're not going to see it here. Our big risk on impacting renters is the fact that rent has gone up about $400 a month in Central Carrboro for a 2-bedroom apartment in the last 3 years. Part of that is because we're not building housing. See Shelton Station. Racial equity questions was mentioned a moment ago. You have process in your packet, but not policy impact. And really, we have an affordability crunch. BIPOC residents are more affected. The other thing is that when we can't do commercial because of parking requirements downtown, we're not growing our tax base as fast as we could. We have maybe, I think it was 1 penny for affordable housing, but a bigger tax base allows you to do that 2 pennies, 3 pennies to subsidize folks at the lower 30% AMI level. I'd love to see us get closer to that. Questions about the level of transit service? I'm going to tell you, I'm a transportation professional, they're absolutely irrelevant. You don't need to think about them. Graham, Albemarle, Mooresville, they have 80% drive alone. We have 55% drive alone because 45% of people bike, walk, and bus to work. We're knocking it out of the park. We're in a much safer place. We have 6 bus routes to their 1 or none. We have better bike infrastructure. We can do this. They've led. Let's follow. Some quotes here from famous people. I'll skip ahead. What you should do. You should remove all commercial minimums in town this evening. Developers will still be able to propose as much parking as they want, and you can decide later in the downtown plan if it's prudent to come back and apply maximums. You can move forward with the residential stuff you have on the table tonight, too. That's good. But the big thing is on the right. We have this pile of speculative concerns that our policy is resting on, and until we put those in the proper perspective, we can't rest on racial equity and climate action. And so we need to make these smaller in reference to our pillars, and we need to focus on our pillars. And more staff research isn't going to get you there. Only your leadership will. So thank you. And
Thank you, Patrick.
there's
Thanks
your chart.
Getting in a lot of material there in a short time.
Sorry, sometimes I feel like I'm an auctioneer.
No, it was very well done. Thank you. Next on the list, I have Catherine Frey. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you. I hope everyone's well tonight. I wanted to speak in particular about Section 2 alternate here. I think you have all heard from me before on around the comprehensive plan, around my thoughts on our parking standards. I'll just echo something that Patrick said about the fact that the presumptive standard is not being treated as one. And we hear this on the planning board all the time. Developers will come to the planning board and they will say, how do I meet this requirement? And I look at an example like Shelton Station, where the planning board urged the developer to take advantage of that flexibility, and the developer expressed to us that he did not feel that he could do so. And when you look at the parking minimums, the presumptive standard, what you get is what you've got at Shelton Station, which is a lot that is 50% surface parking by area. You can see that actually throughout downtown Carrboro, that the presumptive standards have gotten us to a place where we are well in excess of 30–40% surface parking by area. That's a lot of land that's not going to other uses. So I would encourage you to think really hard about whether or not you want to keep any of the presumptive standards. I think it's really important to note, as you're thinking in particular about Section 2 alternate, we're talking about preserving access for low-income folks, for seniors. It is important to make sure that people are able to access our town, access the services they need. One part of that is affordability, and a single surface parking space costs a bare minimum of $1,200. I'm just talking about the asphalt. A structured parking space costs $25,000 per space on average. So thinking about if we retain any part of these presumptive standards, the impact that that has on rents and on the costs of what we build, that also impacts people's ability to access town. And it does so over a much longer period of time. Thanks so much. Good night.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I don't have other speakers signed up. Tina, would you mind rejoining us? I have a quick question. You mentioned that one of the, and if, maybe it was the previous slide. It was on like considerations or something like that. Right, yeah. One of the things you mentioned in commenting here was that just sort of the difficulty of addressing here the fact that there are neighborhoods in Carrboro that don't have as good a transit service or any transit service, just because they're more suburban in nature and it's hard to sort of fixed routes to suburban neighborhoods, that kind of thing. And I think that one of the reasons that in the comprehensive plan we pressed on this idea that this kind of reform would be focused primarily on areas that do have transit service was to kind of get around that reality, or at least acknowledge that reality, right? So I guess I was a little confused about why that was presenting a problem as consideration for staff or perhaps others, when the whole point of the comp plan recommendation was to focus this reform on areas of town that do have transit access, and in recognition of the fact that there are parts of town that do not yet have it. Can you say anything? And my question makes sense, first of all, and if so, can you comment?
Sure. Sorry, that was a different voice than I was expecting. Sure. I think there's a couple elements of that. So first, when we started looking about this in May, transit service has increased a little bit since then. But it's also trying to find kind of a logical boundary system. We looked at potentially an overlay district of some sort and trying to figure out, and finally kind of pulled out the watershed altogether and tried to figure out kind of how best to do kind of a logical setup. And at the time, there really wasn't an area where we could say dependably that there would be 15-minute service, throughout the full day. And that was when we began to shift toward a slightly different approach.
It was really a matter of definitions. In other words, establishing the parameters by which you would figure out what properties are in the right place. And so your solution to that was just sort of just be a little broader and think in terms of zoning districts rather than proximity to transit.
Really to use, yeah.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks. I'll start calling on council members as you begin raising your hands, but since I haven't seen any hands yet, I'm going to make a couple other quick comments. First, I think actually Catherine Frey just said this exactly what I was thinking, which is the problem is, yes, it's a presumptive standard. And I remember times myself being on the planning board saying, hey, it's a presumptive standard, guys. Didn't matter, right? There was something about the fact that it was memorialized in the ordinance as a sort of pseudo requirement, whether it was presumptive or not, that just sort of led people to treat it as a requirement. And I think leads people to treat it that way. So I think that's one interest I have here, is in being less presumptive and more determinative. That's the right antonym. My next comment is really just one of appreciation. There were something like 10 public events that you all attended or organized to, in part, promote your wish to get public input on this. I thought that was fantastic. I saw you all at many of those events, and I know that you all have done that kind of thing before. It's not the first time you've done that style of public input gathering, but I thought it was fantastic. And I just appreciate you all I know it takes time and effort too, so thank you for doing that. I think it's important. It continues in the spirit of the comprehensive plan and the process that we used for getting input and participation in the creation of that plan. And I just encourage you to keep it up. And then finally, I'm really sympathetic to this idea that we can be bolder here, in particular on the commercial parking side of things. I guess, for better or worse, I always come back to some process questions. One of those is we haven't put that before the advisory boards or before public input, specifically that question, although it seems to have emerged on its own anyway. So maybe that's mitigates my concern, but I just want to throw that out there that, the draft ordinance that staff presented to the advisory boards was this particular question. Doesn't mean I've made a decision about whether we should go that way or not. I just want to share that thought. I think in my mind, and I don't remember why this was, the sort of directly addressing the presumptive minimums for commercial or non-residential uses was frankly an oversight. Because clearly we should be thinking about that, just as we're thinking about parking requirements for residential uses. Okay, that's enough of me. Susan had her hand up, and so does Sammy. And I'll keep my eyes open for others. Susan, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Damon. Thank you, Tina, once again for the presentation. And I just wanted to add on to what Damon said about all of the engagement this summer. It's been a busy summer for staff with Bowling Creek Greenway as well. But really appreciate you all being out there and talking to folks and getting this really helpful feedback. I was hoping to jump in because I wanted to throw out an idea. I think I've talked to everybody about this before the meeting tonight, but it may sort of help inform the conversation as we move along. First, I'm happy we have started this process, but I did want to throw out a suggestion, something I've been thinking about. I am totally on board in terms of eliminating the parking minimums near transit in this residential development, new residential development. I do have a few concerns about the converting the minimums to maximums. I would just assume that we don't have any maximums either. And I wanted to talk just a little bit about that. When we take away the minimums, we're basically entrusting lenders and investors, right? That they kind of know how much parking will be needed there in order to make the project viable. And we saw this at the 203 North Greensboro project. We saw it at South Green, that the developers ended up saying, yeah, we can actually get by with less parking than what is in code. So I feel like if we are entrusting developers to say, we're going to be getting the least amount of parking available for you, I'm not really sure why I feel we have a need for maximums. And so here we are, we're sort of taking away a regulatory constraint with the minimums, in the spirit of trying to unleash some new development, some new infill development downtown, which we desperately need. But then we're taking the constraints and now we're just putting them over into the maximums. And the part that seems especially confusing to me is that we already agreed that those minimums, as we talked about, Barbara, they're based on these very, very outdated formulas, right? I mean, they go decades back. So it's almost as if we're taking these random numbers from the minimums and now we've got random numbers for the maximums. So I would sort of suggest that we don't have any minimums, any maximums, and we just see where we go with that. And one of the things I would be especially curious about is, first of all, does it unleash some new development that we need, as we talked about earlier, the importance, Tina, of broadening our commercial tax base that we desperately need. But it also, we could build into this whole process, I think we need regular points of monitoring. So every 18 months, every 2 years, how are we doing in terms of the spillover parking? How are we doing in terms of, to what extent are landlords? I know one question has come up about the unbundling of the rent from the parking. Are landlords actually doing that, or are they not passing the savings on to those folks who don't have cars? Are we getting enough parking for people who are of all physical abilities, for people who have ADA needs? So I think we could do this process, have regular points in time when we're checking in and seeing how we're doing. Danny, as you said earlier today, maybe some of these natural maximum requirements will sort of emerge during this process, and then we can add those in at a later time. But also, as Damon, you mentioned, these are all very consistent. Just really what our comprehensive plan says is eliminate the minimums. It doesn't say anything about converting to maximums. So it would be an opportunity. Let's take things one step at a time, see the adjustments that we need to be making while we're, of course, sort of monitoring on the way. So I wanted to just sort of throw out that idea and get everybody's feedback on that. And while I think of it, I also wanted to say that I would be in favor of Section 2 alternate, just as the advisory boards were recommending. Thank you all.
Thank you, Susan. Sammy, you're next.
Yeah, I am for maximums. I think that it's not an issue. These are standards that are perhaps too generous in terms of what they require already as minimums. And putting a ceiling allows for, in the future, to be able to ratchet down according to whether, aligned to whether, to what degree this town understands climate emergency. We can ratchet down, because the last thing we should be supporting is more car infrastructure, whether it be where people can house it or where the public will pay for those private vehicles to move through. In terms of commercial, the reason why in the comprehensive plan it wasn't included, I'll remind folks, is there's this balance that happens in the way that the town of Carrboro currently has parking is very much dependent on private lot owners and what they are giving according to what we allow in our land use ordinance. Unfortunately, the sharing of the parking translates into an excessive amount of parking. And we had a work session March 14th where we talked about some strategies that staff is going to come back to this council at some point and share in terms of like pay for parking that is shared with private lot owners, for example, and also a commercial business improvement district through which we may generate the revenue for paying for the fund to pay for access to the downtown, which means not parking, but all the other cheaper and better ways to provide access to the downtown. My concern with getting rid of that now is losing the leverage we currently have with commercial owners in terms of what they're already putting into the bucket as it relates to the opportunity costs that they're not cashing in on of better use for their parking lots. So my recommendation is that, yes, we pursue getting rid of the minimums and creating those maximums for the downtown commercial, but we do it in parallel to this challenge of how to pay for the public parking or the public access to the downtown that we will need if we aren't holding private lot owners to provide that themselves, if that makes sense.
Just for the reminder about that one point, Sammy. Rather than just repeat what you said, I'm going to say, it sounds like, so what you're recommending is go ahead and approve the draft ordinance and then continue this conversation where we're getting more information back from staff about downtown parking arrangements and potential alignments with business owners and that kind of thing. and see what that leads to in terms of the commercial side of things.
Well, I would say let's just go with the residential as is being proposed tonight. But the commercial, we already gave direction to staff to come back with a downtown business improvement district and the parking. But that when we revisit that, as we've already given direction, that it be brought before the council simultaneous to the thinking by staff. I mean, it's not hard to change that. It's just like we did this, change the minimum to a maximum. You know, I think that needs to happen simultaneously. I won't
Also,
be
the
around.
downtown area plan is going to
Which is why we're here, not oversight strictly. I think
Right.
is we, when we were talking about this, folded this consideration into the small area use plan.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Sam.
Yeah, and I personally don't feel like the small area use plan is necessary because I understand the reason for why there's so much parking in their downtown is because there's a fiefdom and there's a requirement by the town to have a certain percentage, and it's just a nut to crack that we can do through a business improvement district combined with other modalities of accessing the downtown, including pay for parking that is shared amongst private lot owners.
Thank you, Sammy. Okay, other hands, Barbara.
And so first of all, thank you, Tina, for the presentation and also for the extra outreach. I really think that it makes a difference, not just here, but, you know, with a lot of other things that we're doing. My question is, could we adopt attachment A and think about or insert Councilmember Romaine's concern about just, checking in periodically, you know, on how things are going, you know, if we do adopt attachment A. That's what I was thinking about.
And when we check in to consider at that point if sort of these natural maximums have emerged, and then put the maximums at that point.
But would that be confusing to do that?
May I
was
offer
thinking.
a
Yes.
point of clarity?
That's what we're looking for. Thank you.
So, I think if the council is interested in having a reporting mechanism, I think we can figure out a way of including that either as the resolution or as a separate motion. The other matter of changing the ordinance, which has been advertised, I think that would require us coming back potentially, because that would be a bit of a modification to what has been presented so far.
Which change?
Changing the
Commercial.
certainly the commercial, but even getting rid of the maximum as you've described. I believe that would be considered enough of a departure that we would want to
I
bring
see.
that back.
You want to re-advertise, essentially go through the process again.
I think so, yeah.
That's what I was worried about.
Yeah.
Before I, Barbara, you still have the floor?
No, I mean, I'm still where I was. And also just wanted to say about the adoption with the alternate section number 2.
Okay. Great, thanks. And I was actually going to come back and check with Sammy about that one point. Are you okay with that section 2 alternate?
Trying to
language?
read up on what that is. I missed it. Can someone just briefly tell me what?
I think if you look at page, I think
see it here.
it's 7 of attachment C, which is the annotated. So the difference is that the way the ordinance is written now, there is a reduced parking requirement for multifamily for developments which are intended to serve low or moderate income folks or the elderly. This would alternate 2 would remove that, so that their parking standards would be the same.
And so folks want to make them sit the same or
Want to make them the same. Yeah.
I think the interest was not calling out a specific special class.
Yeah, I'm for that. I don't see what the problem is.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, that's right. It was raised by Randy several months ago. So Sammy, you're okay with that as well. Just kind of polling as we go along here. Who's next? Randy, are you?
Yeah, Barbara, help me with this. Didn't the REC discuss this? The Race Equity Commission.
It said in the notes that they haven't reviewed it.
I remember they might have had a conversation, but they weren't finished.
No recommendation.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. But I just want to, it all seemed pretty clear until I read through the Economic Sustainability Commission recommendations, which I mean, considering that this is something that could potentially impact residential. So I'm going to ask, two questions. One, let's say a developer brings to us a 3 or 4-story, 5-story project with commercial at the street level. What happens? What happens with the review of that with this? What does that look like?
Well, I'll look for Marty to interpret, but I believe we would look towards this for the residential portion, and we would still look toward the existing presumptive standards for the commercial portion.
So, all right, help me think this through. So, because one of our goals is, of course, to create more of that, right? So, and so what happens with enforcement for that? Or what if the owner of the building determines that they're going to charge, more? What happens? I mean, I'm just thinking what's going on with Carmel and the predatory towing. Just talk to me about, because I don't want us to be painted into a corner where we don't think of the unintended consequences.
I think those types of things are kind of yet to be determined. And particularly this question about would renters begin to charge additional costs for having a parking space? In consulting with our new affordable housing director and talking about this particular point, it will be, I think we have to wait and see if shared savings from reducing a requirement are passed on. I don't think we have enough data to say that's the case or not.
Yeah.
And what we have heard from, what she conveyed that she has heard so far from applicants is that density tends to be that the interest that leads towards more affordability, more so than removing a requirement. So I think we'll just have to see how that plays out.
Yeah, and for that reason, I really appreciate Susan mentioning, having some assessment. But, Susan had said this in her remarks initially, and I was thinking it's really important for us to have some kind of systematic assessment and really keep our fingers on the pulse of what this could look like over time. Because it's not really, you don't know how it's going to unfold. And I think for that reason, being cautious about the question of maximums is also something that requires some flexibility. I really appreciated that you all were aware of the need for that flexibility and knowing what you don't know as yet. So, I just wanted to make that comment, and also for council to be aware that the Economic Sustainability Commission, which is the only representation of business that we have of all of our advisory boards, that they're wary and that they had made a motion to disapprove of this. And I would say to council to keep checking back with our business community, which is small enough as it is, because if we want to be able to expand commercial, especially coupling it with residential, we surely want the business community to be with us. Thank you.
Okay, Eleazar?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my question is around some of these concerns about, we've already seen some apartment complexes in Carrboro use predatory parking and mine specifically. So if we were able to get this passed, if it goes into effect, say there is an apartment complex that decides that they're going to start charging folks for that parking spot. I guess, Mr. Attorney, this is a question for you. Is there any action the town can take in that situation? I know I'm giving you, a hypothetical, but would there be any, given that right now we can't take action around the towing, right? Would this be a situation where the town has no ability to do anything about, apartment complexes now charging more folks in these areas, in these apartment complexes?
Not to my knowledge, but certainly something we can go and look into. I don't believe there's, pursuant to the police powers, I mean, it's their private property on what they want to go and do.
Yeah, that's what I imagined. So I do want, I'm in line with where we're at tonight. I do believe that as far as a commercial, I would definitely want to go through a whole process and to see where folks are at on that. And I'm also in line with this idea of having a report of some sort where we're clocking any of these changes that are happening in Carrboro. We've already seen folks in Carrboro have to move away due to predatory parking enforcement, and this is contributing to Black and brown folks being pushed out of this town. So I want to make sure that any action we take up here goes against that practice rather than enforces it. I understand that, Raleigh being a city that passed this didn't see any of these implementations. Nonetheless, I want to just make sure that as we move forward with this, we're keeping an eye so that doesn't happen in Carrboro. And if it does happen in Carrboro, trying to find some way that we can work against that practice.
May I ask a question just to be clear? So by predatory parking or towing, you're talking about people who would remove cars from private parking lots?
Or put boots on them
And those are for folks who don't live there?
And live there.
And
For
live
both
there.
that
Okay.
live and
Okay.
don't live there.
Okay.
And that's one of the issues that we've already seen in some apartment complexes here in town. So
Yeah, I think the complexity of it is that at least the cases we've seen, like we're talking about, is not really about the supply of parking on the property. It's about some, I'm not even sure how best to describe what they're doing.
Alternative
Some
reasons for wanting
unkind
to-
implementation of parking expectations around what kinds of vehicles are
Kind of
okay
vehicle,
for their
okay.
residents, that kind of
yeah.
Okay.
So-
which of course differentially impact poor folks.
Yes, those were my comments. I just want to make sure that we keep that in mind as we're doing this. Because, again, I'm in line with making sure that this goes through, but I also want to make sure that we're being responsive to any needs of folks out in the community. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Eliasar. Okay, next is Danny.
Thanks. So, January 16th, is that, I think, when we identified for it to come back?
I think that sounds right.
Thereabouts.
Yeah.
Not that critical, the actual
Yeah.
date. Does that date reflect, like, the re-advertising? If we have to make changes? That seems fast.
It was,
Yep. Okay. That's helpful. Thank you. I guess talking about this tonight, I don't feel crazy strongly about the maximums as far as residential. I am persuaded. I think maximums are a beneficial climate policy, but I'm persuaded that our current number of minimums may not really be a number that we need to be married to as a town. So, I guess I would be interested in what we've talked about is just moving forward with no maximums and then some period of reporting and studying. No minimums, rather. Pardon me. But I'm more concerned tonight about the commercial thing. As I think about this, and originally I was fine with leaving commercial entirely to the downtown plan because I think what we established when we talked about the idea of this business improvement district is that it's a pretty big lift. Legally, in terms of how folks opt into it, in terms of how it is administered. Just we need a lot of outreach. We need quite a bit of legwork. I think.
No, we haven't gotten that information yet.
We did receive a report on the steps that would be needed to do that, did we not? I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was indicated that would be a pretty long tail, unless I'm hallucinating, not for the first time.
Tina or Trish?
I think it was John Hartman Brown.
During the work session?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we left that work session. I looked at the work session meeting, and we left it giving directions to staff because we wanted to know more about it.
Why don't we
But
ask?
I remember him talking about
What's the status of that, Trish?
Yeah, John's working on ordinance provisions to bring back to you, and his has been. I mean, that is moving forward, and we have bundled sort of in our minds, you know, the master plan for downtown with the follow up on the parking, but that is a separate activity that is proceeding. So I think that will be in advance of you know, obviously a master plan and the elements of it. So
In
that
fact, did
work
I
is
see-
separate and independent, and John is working on that, and I know he's been working.
Marie,
on
did
it.
I think I might even have seen that on the calendar for the agenda coming up in the next several meetings.
Actually, I asked Marie, but you're going to check in with John because he's out right now. Yeah.
But I thought the calendar that you sent out today actually had this blocked out on the calendar.
Yeah, I
for
think
receiving a
it's
report.
it's coming. You know, he's been working to
Coming
bring
soon.
it forward.
Okay.
I can't remember exactly
That's
the
the
date,
point.
Well, thank you. That is helpful, but it's still we can kind of bracket it on the because I think that it may be that we don't need to necessarily wait on that to. I mean, it sounds like whatever. We'll bracket that. Sort of downtown aside, the commercial issue that occurs to me tonight is you know we consider PUDs and developments that may not be in the downtown that have commercial elements. Is all of the same considerations apply for mixed use developments if there's commercial and we have minimums, you know, near residential projects, we're still running into the same developer friction here, where you know if they find the minimums onerous or not meeting their needs, you know, say, you know, away from downtown, out Jones Ferry, up Old 86, a new PUD development. It strikes me that we need to deal with that. But it sounds like, okay, so clarifying, are we comfortable with, do we feel in the order of operations that we need to have this improvement district thing in place before we act on downtown? That's a
I
bit,
guess so I'll just stop with that one. I think we don't know yet if that will be the decision of the council, right? So I think that's part of the complication. It's sort of a to be determined factor. Although I take Sammy's points that it could be an influential factor in a conversation about parking.
I like the idea. I guess what I'm saying is that I think we could probably act on the parking with, you know, recognition of the fact that like new developments downtown aren't just bursting down the door in terms of rate. You know, like this is not likely to change as we are working through that improvement district. It sounds to me like this is going to have to come back to us. And when it comes back to us, I am pretty interested in some commercial action because it's going to have to come back regardless with this issue of maximums, which if I hear the consensus correctly, we're not interested in maximums right now. If we are interested in maximums, we want to study and implement later. That's what I'm hearing. I feel good about that for residential.
I'm actually for
Sammy
Sammy
supports
is-
maximums, yeah. And I, we did have a conversation, and I'm not, it's not a deal breaker for me, but I would prefer to do the maximums. But in any case, keep going.
Well, so I mean, I'm trying to balance like the possibility of this coming back, the urgency of addressing commercial where it is not necessarily downtown, the urgency of addressing commercial within downtown, and this other plan that, you know, sounds like it's maybe not going to take as long as I was afraid. All to say, I think we should put commercial in, more aggressive, have it come back. Maximums TBD. As far as residential, I think that sounds like an open question with Damon and Sammy's points on the floor.
Danny, let me just make sure I understand what you're recommending.
How could you not have gotten it from them?
Come on. that we do not take action on the draft ordinance tonight.
Correct.
Not even on the minimum, removing the minimums. And I guess maybe, Tina, you can, you and planning department feel like, so the draft ordinance that's before us has removal of minimums in residential zones as well as the adding of maximums.
Mhm.
That's what's before us. your feeling is that taking out the maximums, that in itself would require a sort of review of the,
I think so, yes.
even though it would be taking out a restriction. It's not, in other words, anyway. Okay, you're confirming that staff would want to put that back through the meat grinder.
And if it would be helpful in the example that you just provided with the PUD, the applicant right now can ask for less parking. So that presumptive standard is there presently for commercial uses.
I'm doing exactly what we don't want them doing. I'm not treating it presumptively. That's a good point.
Yeah, hold on, I'll come to you in just one sec, Sammy. So, I mean, that is a good point that the presumptive standards remain for, I'm sorry, I put a mint in my mouth and now I feel disgusting. If we took action on the draft ordinance tonight, on the minimums in particular, the presumptive minimum standard would still be in place for commercial zones.
That's right, there'd be no change to that.
Right, so just kind of keeping that in mind here as we're talking through this. Okay, anyway, I'm starting to go in circles. Sammy, go ahead.
Why? Wait, I don't understand. I talked to Susan about it, but frankly, Susan, I still don't understand why the maximums are a problem.
Well, I would just, my point on all of this is that the minimums that we use at this point, they from formulas, 60 years ago? They're outdated, they're irrelevant. And so why are we just sort of taking random numbers and now making them random minimums, now making them random maximums? I would rather let's go without and let some natural maximums emerge rather than just have these random maximums.
Right, but these minimums that are no problem being a maximum because we've never had anyone ask us for more parking are easier to ratchet down if the language is in place in the ordinance to tweak than to have to put back the language. So I think it's actually, we're talking about another meeting. If we want to be efficient with time and staff time and all that, like, let's just move this tonight. And when we get to the understanding through experience of where things actually are, we come back and just ratchet the language down so that it matches what it is we want.
Mm-hmm.
So Sammy's made a point that I think is really, I hadn't thought about, but I think I've heard you made it before. Presumptive standard we have now isn't stopping anyone from asking to have more parking than the presumptive standard today, but we don't see that happening.
Typically,
so this maximum is
not.
not, if we treated that as a maximum, we haven't been seeing that sort of naturally being treated as a barrier to adding additional parking, because what we have seen, I think, as you know, is that if anything, folks want to provide less,
right?
But they feel required to provide more because of the so-called presumptive standard.
Right.
Well, if it would be helpful, I'm sorry.
I'll come back to you, Sammy.
If it would be helpful, we have been checking when we have completed the parking plans. That has been one of the things we've asked consultants, is to check the numbers in our presumptive standards, and so far they've been on target. So that's not to say that they shouldn't change, but we've been making an effort to keep those relatively current. But again, you know, the presumptive component, I think, is the key.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you still have the floor. Go ahead.
I'm just ready to move the consistency resolution if this makes sense. And with the point and request of staff, as you're already doing with developers in terms of keeping a tabs on whether it's working for developers or not, keeping a tab on to what degree they naturally go under that ceiling, so that we can thereafter have a justification beyond the climate one for reducing that standard.
Okay, so hold on to that last thought there, Sammy. I heard a motion first, which was to approve with the consistency resolution, presumably indicating that the draft ordinance is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Is that right? And we'll continue discussion, but Sammy's made a motion for the consistency resolution. Is there a second?
I think I'm persuaded. Yeah, second.
So it's been seconded. So we'll continue talking, but we have a motion on the table. Barbara.
And so with Sammy's motion, are we able to, I think I may have heard him say it about checking back in?
I think
Paragraph.
the reason I
did
asked,
I hear that?
yeah, the
or-
reason I asked Sammy to hold on to that note, which is a good one,
Is more
is I think
appropriate.
maybe that comes up later with the next motion.
Okay.
It would be the better place to stick that.
Cool, then I'm okay.
So let's keep talking, Susan.
Yes, then I was hoping to follow up with Barbara's question. Yes, Randy pointed out that the ESC voted against this ordinance. And actually, Randy, the vote was 4-0. I know you had to leave just a little bit early. And so I want to address one of the concerns that did come up, which was this, the idea of the spillover. We live in a very, very dense community, as you pointed out, Tina. There's nowhere for cars to go out and park on streets. So that begs the question, what are you thinking in terms of what type of process needs to be put in place to know when we are developing these spillover problems? Is it going to be community reporting to staff, or how are these types of problems going to be identified, and how will they be resolved?
I don't know the answer to either one of those. In terms of how they would be reporting, I would imagine we would receive phone calls, or they may go to the police or to other upper management staff. I have friends who come home and find people in their parking lot, and it is very frustrating when you commute, from Raleigh. So I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know how we would resolve it other than perhaps working with those individual property owners and seeing if they have a strategy for that. So I think that's a concern that we'll just have to work through.
Susan, back to you. It might be worth too, Susan, doing some just minimal research to find out whether this has actually been a consequence in other communities. I mean, this removal of parking minimums thing, this is not new anymore. This is no longer on the cutting edge of zoning reform. And I think it would be relatively easy to find out from communities that have taken this approach to their parking requirements whether that has in fact been a consequence. That they're seeing, some triangulation of parking supply on neighboring or commercial properties nearby or something like that. I haven't heard that before, but
it's happened in Portland, but that's obviously a much different type of situation. So just one more follow up in terms of what Barbara asked. I do agree too that just sort of some type of regular, kind of like reporting process in place. And talk to us a little bit about that. I mean, is it that, let's say, every 2 years we would be looking at how many new residential developments, how much parking was added at those residential developments, and comparing that to the parking that we would have had if there were minimum parking requirements there, just to kind of see what's happening? How are you thinking in terms of that kind of process of how are we doing? Are we having enough parking to keep up with demand?
Sure. I may look to Marty to assist with this response, but what I would imagine we would do is we would watch as applications came forward and how much parking applicants submitted as part of their proposal. And we would compare that with what would have been the standard if these standards were still in place. And we would probably ask questions, how have you selected this amount of parking? Do you think it is sufficient? Certainly ADA requirements would need to stay in place. I think that's a concern. And so we would just have to see where it goes. It would, unfortunately, it may take a little bit of time, to have either a large multifamily development to kind of see how that happens, or to see a project more in the, I don't want to say rural area, but more out of downtown, where perhaps folks have a third car and there's only enough room for two. Where would those other cars go? And I think those are the things we just have to keep an eye on and see what happens.
Great. Thank you very much.
thank you, Susan. That comment is reminding me again, kind of coming back to the point Sammy raised earlier, which is that even under the current ordinance, you don't have residential developers asking for more parking than what's presumptively required, which is just interesting to be aware of.
Yeah.
So it's, okay. I want to just, before we move on, this has come up with several council members, and I certainly agree with the idea that we want staff to be observing, any outcomes here that are interesting. I also just want to be aware of monitoring that kind of thing, depending on how you do it, can be a burden on staff. And I just say that to, I think this often comes up when we think we have these great ideas as a council and forget that when we say, hey, by the way, bring us a report in 18 months, well, it's like, that's an 18 months that goes by really fast. So just, and I honestly don't think we're going to see this kind of massive change over an 18-month period. Yeah, I mean, this is a long-term kind of change in terms of shaping the built environment, right? It's not something where we need staff, counting every space and reporting back 12 months later. I'm appreciative of the interest in monitoring and seeing what the outcomes are, but I also want to be realistic about staff's time, capacity, and really necessity for doing, over monitoring. Okay, so Sammy has moved the consistency resolution. And Danny seconded it. Are we comfortable saying that the draft ordinance we have before us is in fact consistent with the comprehensive plan as described in that? Yeah. No. In that case, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
Move the draft ordinance.
Okay, and you also wanted to add a comment about.
Staff already keeps a tab of it. I don't know how automated it's not. I can't imagine that being that hard, where you just have some kind of standing spreadsheet where you pop in the number every time you, do an application. I don't know, whatever. But that was what I think would be valuable.
Is this about on the commercial side or?
Oh, on the and on the commercial side, yes. I would like to. I after our work session, March 14th, I believe, we gave direction to staff to come back and two things. One, business improvement district information, and two, pay for parking. And I would like to have those be on the same night and agenda for us to also consider parking max or commercial. And I'm pretty sure y'all will approve of it. It probably won't be when I'm around, but I would hope that y'all would not paint the town into a corner and put us on the hook for millions of dollars worth of public parking that we would be responsible for without doing that transition in a way that brings commercial property owners in on the hook with payment in lieu of the property that they won't have to be holding for us for providing access to the downtown. And just want to remind y'all that 60 spaces at the 203 cost $150,000 a year. And in our parking study, the estimate for demand, I believe, was about 3,000 spaces. Don't know exactly what it was, but my point being, if you multiply, per space of what that parking deck represents by what our actual demand is, it would give us a sense of annual cost of providing access to the downtown via a parking deck. And that's the cost that we want to compare to alternatives such as transit and infrastructure and those kinds of things. And I think by having a business improvement district where you have funds and you present those alternatives to the business owners to choose what they want, they would likely want the cheaper options instead of this fixation that currently happens with parking. And so, I don't know if that's, I could summarize it for the motion.
Well, let me try just to kind of hit that kernel, which I think is the most important part of what you just said in terms of future direction. Staff is already coming back relatively soon with a report on the business improvement district idea and on the various strategies for paid parking in the downtown. Is the direction to staff to include in that same meeting some consideration about moving forward on a draft ordinance for commercial minimums, parking minimums, and / maximums.
Sure, and I'm hesitant to say yes, but I think that's where it's going to go anyway. But I just want to make sure that those two issues are considered
discussed together.
alongside, yeah, each other.
Randy.
Yeah, I don't know whether this needs to be formulated into a friendly amendment, but I'm guessing we need more input from the Economic Sustainability Commission on commercial minimums.
Yeah, we'll certainly have to get that as part of this.
So I'd like that to be part of this, that informs that next step, since you're talking about this being a next step. Because that hasn't been, posed to the Economic Sustainability Commission in that way. And I think that's critical, because as I said, there's no other voice, and the comprehensive plan really doesn't speak to economic development in the way that this could possibly have unintended consequences. So
I think maybe let me tag on, since there hasn't been a motion yet, so no amendment needed. I'll just tag on to maybe my attempt to distill what Sammy said is when that next conversation about parking policy comes up, just some next steps from staff about moving a potential ordinance amendment around commercial parking minimums to the advisory board level, getting their input on that. I'm not saying it very well, but
Wouldn't that be part of a
it would be part of a text amendment process, yeah.
right, but specifically because the Economic Sustainability Commission,
you have to make sure that they would have
disapproved.
referred to the ESC.
Exactly.
Okay. I'm also kind of just like peering over at Trish when I say these words, because I feel like maybe I'm getting something wrong here. But am I making sense, Tina? That we want, as part of the next step, to ensure that, as Sammy said, the conversation about commercial parking minimums and maximums happens in the context of the staff's reporting on the business improvement district and paid parking strategies for downtown, and that any potential text amendment that's offered around commercial parking minimums and maximums is referred to the usual advisory board and most certainly to the Economic Sustainability Commission.
I'll move that with the addition that context about potential cost for the town if we were to take on all the demand for parking that is currently supplied by
including information about how much the town would have to, the cost of parking, public parking. And is that part of a motion that adopts the ordinance?
Yes, that's a part of the draft ordinance.
Could we split those?
We can split those. Let's do that. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
So first, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the draft ordinance, attachment B, I believe.
Second.
Moved by Sammy, seconded by Danny, that we approve the draft ordinance. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's passed unanimously. The next motion is Sammy's also, which is the notes that we added about next steps and process. And hopefully I'll help the clerk capture that if it has. Sammy, so moved by you, seconded by
Second.
Eleazar. Any further discussion of that issue? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
I didn't actually close the public hearing, so now it's closed. And I guess I just want to say one quick thing before we leave this item, now that it's actually been adopted. Y'all, this is exciting. This is one of the main priorities for the first year or so of implementation of the comp plan that we identified with the town manager and his staff, and let's keep it moving.
Can I add just one more
Yes,
quick comment I wanted to add to that. Tina, you mentioned, I think it was in the abstract, about as we make these parking changes, how important it is to be moving forward with these other, multimodal options for transportation, helping us get out of our cars and helping us to use transit and to have more bicycle infrastructure and ways to walk safely. But it reminds me, in the consent agenda, tonight we approved buffered bike lanes and also the bike loop detectors. So all of these really good things are been happening to help us move in the direction that we can be easing up on these parking requirements, knowing that people can still get to where they need to be and get there safely. So it is an exciting moment.
Very clear examples of exactly the point Sammy is making, that this has to be considered in terms of how people get around, not just by parking cars, but
Right.
in all the other ways. They all mutually reinforce one another, these decisions about these things. So thank you for that, Susan. Okay, folks, before we go into closed session, we have a couple items in closed session. One is for personnel matter, one is for attorney-client privilege. Is there anything more from council before we do that? Entertain a motion to go into closed session.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Barbara, seconded by Eleazar. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Going into closed session in just a couple minutes after people leave.
Like a 5-minute break? Like 5-minute break?
Yeah, we'll take a 5-minute recess.